So this week we are coming to the close of our series in this very short but very, very profound book of Habakkuk. It was written 2,500 years ago by this prophet named Habakkuk. And as we've seen, Habakkuk was living during a very tumultuous and very dark time in the history of Israel. Israel as a whole, as a kingdom, had already been divided some years before into two nations, a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom retained the name Israel, and they had already been conquered by this nation of Babylon. They were the big bad bullies of the ancient Near East, and they had overrun Israel. But the southern kingdom was still free. It was the southern kingdom of Judah, which is where Jerusalem was. And Habakkuk was writing from Judah, but just because they hadn't been overrun by Babylon didn't make their situation that much better. And Habakkuk is living under, as all of his people, living under the reign of a very corrupt king. And because of this corrupt king, the government is corrupt, and the rich and the powerful are devouring the poor and the powerless. And so the land, the nation is rife with corruption and greed and violence and cruelty. And so Habakkuk is crawling out to God. He's saying, God, where are you in the midst of what we are enduring as a nation? Because he has picked up on this, there's this cognitive dissonance of what he knows God is, who he knows God is compassionate, loving, just, and the reality of the world that he's living in. He said, God, this doesn't make sense. Like, why, if you are this kind of God, loving, compassionate, and just, why are we living this reality? God, we need you to show up and to change this. Solve this problem. And God says, I hear you, and I'm going to move. I'm bringing Babylon to wipe you out. And he thinks, that's not what I was looking for. Right? That's not the solution that Habakkuk was hoping for. I don't know what he was looking for, but it was not Babylon to come in and to conquer their nation. And so he pleads with God a second time and says, God, this makes no sense. Like Babylon, they're worse than we are. They're evil and corrupt. They make us look like saints. So why would you use them to conquer us and to weed out our corruption? And God says, hey, don't worry about it. Just wait on me, because I'm going to take care of Babylon as well, just not in your timing and not in your way. As we come to the third chapter, Habakkuk now responds once more to God. And knowing what he knows, knowing that Babylon is coming, knowing what his nation will endure, knowing that they will be conquered, knowing that they will be taken into exile, knowing that people will die and starve and worse, knowing all of that, he still gives this final prayer to God of faith and trust. And if you just follow along with me as I read this prayer of Habakkuk the prophet. Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds, O Lord. Renew them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. God came from Teman, the Holy One from Mount Paran, Selah. His glory covered the heavens, and his praise filled the earth. His splendor was like the sunrise. Rays flashed from his hand where his power was hidden. Plague went before him. Pestilence followed his steps. He stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. The ancient mountains crumbled and the age-old hills collapsed. His ways are eternal. And I saw the tents of Cushan in distress, the dwellings of Midian in anguish. Were you angry with the rivers, O Lord? Was your wrath against the streams? Did you rage against the sea when you rode with your horses and your victorious chariots? You uncovered your bow. You called for many arrows. Selah. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and withered. The torrents of water swept by. The deep roared and lifted its waves on high. Sun and moon stood still in the heavens at the glint of your flying arrows, at the lightning of your flashing spear. In wrath you strode through the earth, and in anger you threshed the nations. You came out to deliver your people, to save your anointed one. You crushed the leader of the land of wickedness. You stripped him from head to foot. Selah. With his own spear, you pierced his head. His warriors stormed out to scatter us, gloating as though about to devour the wretched who were in hiding. You trampled the sea with your horses, churning the great waters. I heard and my heart pounded, my lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones, and my legs trembled. Yet I will wait patiently for the day of calamity to come on the nation invading us. Though the fig tree does not bud, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails, and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God my Savior. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer. He enables me to go on the heights. Hey, have you ever been faced with one of your greatest fears? Like really had to stare at it in the face? You ever had something that you were so afraid of, it woke you up in the middle of the night and you just felt the weight of it welling up in panic? And you thought, I don't know how I would survive. Like if this was to happen, I don't know how I would get through my life. And then it happened. I had a very terrifying experience last week. I turned 46. No, I said, it's okay. It's okay. I'm going to live. But one of the things I've noticed about getting older is that what I fear has changed. Right? The things that scare you when you're 26 do not scare you at 46. It's very much, it's shifted. See, when I was younger, I'm not even sure if I would say that I was afraid of much. There's this arrogance, sort of like inevitable, or, you just feel like you're invincible when you're young. And so I wasn't really afraid of a lot of things, but what I tend to be afraid of was that things wouldn't go the way I wanted. Right? Things that wouldn't happen. That's what I fear. I was afraid, like, what if I'm not successful? What if I don't meet the girl of my dreams? What if things don't play out the way that I want? I tend to be more afraid of what wouldn't happen. But when you get older, you start to be more afraid of what will happen. When you're older, you realize that you don't have the control and the power that you thought you had when you were 26. You realize that actually there's not a lot that you control, and you suddenly begin to realize everything that you stand to lose. And thankfully, I think that I'm right in this kind of like perfect zone right now. I'm not too old and too young, right? I'm right. They call it middle age. I call it perfection. Because I have this perspective. I get to kind of see the young and the old, but I'm not there yet. So you're welcome. I get to like share this wisdom with you. But see, no matter what your age is, fear can be crippling. It can overwhelm you. It can be paralyzing. Whatever it is that you're fearing, what might happen, what won't happen, whatever that fear is for you, it can still be overwhelming. And we live in a world that there's an epidemic of fear. There's so much fear in the world, you can taste it. It's every time you get online, it's every time you turn on the TV, it's everywhere you look. There's a fear that's being peddled, that's being sold to us all the time, and we are drinking deep from this well of fear. And no matter what your age, it can be overwhelming, especially when you begin to see your worst fears starting to come true. See, Habakkuk, his worst fears were literally coming true. Like his worst fear of Babylon coming in and destroying their nation, laying waste to everything that he knows and loves. Like this is his worst fear coming to pass. And yet what's so fascinating to me is that as he begins to pray, this final prayer to God, he actually doesn't begin with what he's afraid of. He actually begins with God. He doesn't start with these words of panic, like, oh God, please help us, we're all going to die. No, actually, he begins with words of awe of who God is. He says, Lord, I've heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds, O Lord. Renew them in our day and our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. God came from Taman, the Holy One, from Mount Paran, Selah. We don't know exactly what this word Selah means, but most scholars believe that it's a directive for us to pause for a moment and to consider what's just been said or even what's about to be said. It's like something that's so weighty, so profound that we have to stop and take a breath just to take it all in. And see what he has just described here. He's saying, God, I've seen your deeds. I know the stories of old. I know how you rescued your people from Egypt. And you crossed from Taman through Mount Paran, right? He's describing God on the move to go and rescue his people, just as he did in the olden days. And he's saying, God, I know what you did. It'd be great if you would do that again. Right? But he's calling out on God because he knows of the awesome deeds of God. He says, I stand in awe of you, oh God. God is on the move. He's not passive. He's coming to their rescue. And the name Habakkuk uses for God here, the Holy One. This speaks to God's incomparable power. Like nothing stands in his way. Anything that gets in his way, it's toast, right? It's not going to stop him. His glory covered the heavens, and his praise filled the earth. His splendor was like the sunrise. Rays flashed from his hand, where his power was hidden. Plague went before him, pestilence followed his steps. He stood and shook the earth. He looked and made the nations tremble. The ancient mountains crumbled. The age-old hills collapsed. His ways are eternal. See, if you were to frame this in a movie, this is the hero scene at the end. Like, this is the superhero walking out, and when it looks like everything is falling apart, and then this guy shows up, and it's like, oh, the math has changed, right? Everything you thought you understood just shifted because this guy just showed up, and he is a God who is not to be trifled with. Like, he is awesome. He is powerful. The scene is dark and foreboding and terrifying because this is God. You do not mess with Yahweh. He stands and he surveys the world, all the nations, the mountains that have stood for millennia, everything that feels permanent, he shakes and it gives way to him. He is inevitable, unrelenting, unstoppable, terrible, and awesome. And that's where Habakkuk starts. Yeah, I was never very good at math, I'll be honest. I passed math. I got A's, but it's because I could memorize things and like figure stuff out, but it's not because I understood math, right? I just faked it. So as soon as my kids hit like 4th or 5th grade, it's like, go talk to your mom. You know, like, I can help you with like worthless things like philosophy and English, things you can't make money in, and you just kind of sit over here and think. But when it comes to math and practical things, go see your mom. But what I remember very vaguely, because I am so old now, what I remember very vaguely is that when I took algebra and trigonometry, and you had to solve equations, is that the order in which you solve the equation mattered. Like, if you don't start in the right place or you solve it out of order, like, you end up with the wrong result. If you start wrong, you end wrong. And see, the reason that we are so easily overwhelmed by our fears, can I tell you, is because we are starting in the wrong place. We are starting with what we were afraid of instead of starting with God. And so we become overwhelmed, we become consumed with our fears, and they just grow, don't they? They sort of grow in our imagination. They get bigger and bigger and bigger. They are all consuming. All we can see is what we are afraid of, and then we kind of like try to glance around them and see God, and he seems so dim and small. It's because we are so taken with everything we are afraid of that we barely have the time to cast a passing glance at God. No wonder he seems small. But see, Habakkuk, he does the exact opposite. Right? He's not looking at his problems anymore. Now, when he begins this prayer, he is staring mouth open at God, who is magnificent and powerful and terrible and awesome. Compared to God, like this invading army, it's just not that much to get excited about. I mean, he knows it's real. It's coming, but have you seen God? Like, he's terrifying. That army has nothing on Yahweh. Verse 7, I saw the tents of Cushan in distress, the dwellings of Midian in anguish. I love this because he's describing these Bedouin peoples, these poor peoples. They just happen to be in God's way. Like, he's not against them. He's not at war with them. But when you consider he's talking about God moving, he's on the move from where he is to coming to their rescue. They are directly in his path. And so it's like a freight train coming, and they're like, oh, boy, how do we get out of here, right? They're just terrified because they're in the way of God. He's not even against them. Were you angry with the rivers, O Lord? Was your wrath against the streams? Did you rage against the sea when you rode with your horses and your victorious chariots? This is an allusion to the Exodus, where God rescues his people. And they go through the Red Sea, and he parts the seas, these giant towering waters on either side. As the Pharaoh and his army comes through, he crashes them down, right? And it's thrashing the water, right? It's violent. He's like, were you upset with the water? Because, man, you abused that water. You're just like trampling it. You're just like thrashing with the water. And it's rhetorical, right? He's saying God's movement is so powerful that it's like even nature, if it's in his way, man, it's going to feel it. It's going to feel it. Like, you don't want to get in the way of God coming to rescue his people. It's like if you ever see a parent at a pool and their kid is struggling to swim or drowning, you get out of that parent's way, right? They are going to truck you, right? You don't get in their way. Like if you see a parent, a mom or a dad, and their child is in danger, like, you cease to exist as a person. Like, if you're in their way, they are going to just either bulldoze you or throw you out of the way. You could be their best friend. They do not care about you in that moment. They're going to toss you aside. They're going to get to their child. They will do anything They cannot be stopped. See, God, he's not trying to declare war on the waters or the seas, right? But see, when God is on the move, he is like a tsunami of power. And he routes everything that's in his way. You better move. He is utterly bent on rescuing his children. If something gets in the way, they're going to get trampled because God's not slowing down. He's not stopping to be polite. He has come to rescue them. And he's going to war. He's going to war. Verse 9, you uncovered your bow. You called for many arrows. Selah. He sees God's coming onslaught, and it's like it takes his breath away. You can't imagine what's coming. You split the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and writhed. Torrents of water swept by. The deep roared and lifted its waves on high. Sun and moon stood still in the heavens at the glint of your flying arrows, at the lightning of your flashing spear. So even the sun and the moon stand in awe of God's terrible power. It's like time itself has stood still, holding its breath along with all of nature, because here comes God. In wrath, you strode through the earth. In anger, you threshed the nations. You came out to deliver your people, to save your anointed one. God is the warrior. He is the warrior who strides onto the battlefield, wholly intimidating, inevitable, with strength and power beyond all measure, and he has come to save, to rescue his people. You crushed the leader of the land of wickedness. You stripped him from head to foot. Selah. With his own spear, you pierced his head. When his warriors stormed out to scatter us, gloating, as though about to devour the wretched who were in hiding. See, this is a remarkably, shockingly violent scene. When the enemy thought they'd won, that's the picture. The enemy thinks, we've got them on the run. We're about to slaughter them. This game is over. In that moment, God wades into battle, and he takes the enemy leader's own weapon from him and shoves it through his skull. And then, depending on how you read the Hebrew, he either strips him naked, the ultimate humiliation, or guts him from head to toe. Didn't know that was in the Bible, did you? This is a violent scene of destruction, of God's wrath being poured out. And then there's a final allusion to the Exodus, the Red Sea crashing over the Egyptians. You trampled the sea with your horses, churning the great waters. It's over. It's over. And see, the scene is so violent, it is so destructive, that it makes Habakkuk go weak in the knees. Verse 16, I heard and my heart pounded. My lips quivered at the sound. Decay crept into my bones and my legs trembled. See, when you really understand the power of God, you understand the strength of God. If you grasp how awesome he is, it will make you weak in the knees. It will make you uncomfortable. It will make you a little bit queasy. Because when you are close up to power, when you really see it, it's intimidating. It is awe-inspiring. So for my birthday on Friday, I got to take my two oldest, Gabriel and Jude, to West Point. And we got invited by the Mama family. They've got 3 kids at West Point. We've got some West Pointers right back there. Thank you all for being with us. It's really fun to have you here. And it was so awesome, I got to tell you. I didn't really know what to expect, but it made my university experience seem really, really boring. Right? There were just no tanks on my campus. I don't know what to say, no attack helicopters. And so we were there, and it was amazing. So grateful for the opportunity to go and get a tour, and then we got to see the parade, and then there was the football game afterwards, and it was incredible. It was such a great experience. But I will tell you that when you see military armament on TV, it is not like seeing it in person, especially when it's moving. Right? Like you see a helicopter on TV in a movie or on the news, it's like, oh, that's awesome, that's so powerful, that's so cool. We were there after the parade. They have 3 helicopters out on what they call the plain, out in front of kind of the main student area. And one of them is an attack. I think it was an Apache helicopter, and they've got a transport and a medical. And we're standing there, and then they start, they turn on the engines, the blades start to go, and it is loud and it's powerful. And we're across the field, And then we're just hanging out. I'm like, I want to see this, right? And then the attack helicopter takes off first. And as he lifts off, he actually comes towards us, like getting uncomfortably close, and kind of moves around, showing off because he is awesome, and then takes off that way. And I'm telling you, in that moment, I was not like, that's so cool. I was like, whoa, that is intimidating. Like, that is power. Like, I can't imagine seeing that on a battlefield. Like, whoa. But can I tell you that human power and military power has nothing on God? I love in the Gospels, and some of you know this story, where Jesus is in the boat and with his disciples, and storms come up. Like, we have yet to invent anything that can control a storm, right? Anybody controls the weather, you rule the world, okay? But we can't do it. We can't stop a storm. We can't stop anything that is natural like that. It is so powerful. And so the storm comes up, and it is tossing their little boat on the Sea of Galilee around like nothing. And the disciples, who have spent all of their lives on this sea, who should know how to get out of a storm, they're freaking out. And Jesus, he's asleep, right? He's just like, it's good. I'm tired. Cat nap, And so they wake Jesus up, and they're like, Jesus, don't you even care that we are clearly going to die? We're going to drown. And Jesus, no panic in his voice, walks up to the front and says, that's it, chill, be still, be quiet. And the wind and the waves obey him. And I love the fact that after he does that, the disciples, they're not like, that was awesome, high five, chest bump. Right? They're like, whoa, who is this man? Because when you are in that proximity to power, it is intimidating, and it is awe-inspiring, and it will take your breath away. I have a friend who has been a missionary in Guatemala for many years, and he works with the poorest of the poor. And a lot of his ministry, not intending it to be this way, he went to give education and medical and clothes and everything he could for these families and for these kids, many of whom are living on the street or in conditions that you and I can't even begin to fathom. But in doing so, he began to steal them from the gangs, because he gave them what they needed so they didn't have to rely on the gangs anymore. As you can imagine, that did not make him very popular with the gangs. And so he's received death threats, more than you can imagine, over the years. But several years back, he was at his house, and he had some guys over. He always has guys over. He's always discipling. He's always mentoring these young guys. And so he had 5 or 6 of them there, and one of them's sister was there, and they're just hanging out. And suddenly their door busts in, and the gang members come in. They are armed, and they throw them to the floor. They tie them up, and they said, this is your last day on earth. And they took the sister over to a room, and he just begins to pray. And he said that at first what happened is he's lying there, and he's just like, oh my gosh, this is it. Like, this is the end. I'm never going to see my wife, never going to see my kids again. All these guys are going to die with me. And he's like, it's over. And he said, but he began to be filled with a sense of peace. But then something else happened. He said he began to feel the presence of God in the room. He said, I couldn't explain it. And he said that, but then that awe actually turned to something much more terrible. He said, I began to feel a fear that I've never felt in my entire life. It was way more than having a gun pressed to my head. He said, at that moment, Lucas, at that moment, I just knew Jesus is in the room, and he is angry. He said, at that point, I am terrified, not for me, but for the guys with guns. He said, he began to shout, you got to get out, you got to get out, you got to get out of here. And he said, I don't know if it was my voice and they heard the terror in my voice. He said, I don't know if they felt it in the room, but they all ran out. And no one was injured. No one was hurt. See, in that moment, he wasn't even afraid for himself. He was afraid for them. See, listen. Someday God is going to show up, and he is going to make everything right in this world. And there are people who are going to find themselves on the wrong side of God. And when that time comes, can I tell you, you and I, we're not going to be high-fiving and chest bumping and going, oh yeah, I'm so glad they got what's coming to them. We are going to be afraid for them because we know they've messed with the wrong God. See, this is why Habakkuk, he prays for mercy. Did you catch that? Like, this is amazing. This is astounding to me. He knows Babylon is coming. They're going to rout Israel, and yet, even in the midst of that, he prays for mercy. Lord, I have heard of your fame. I stand in awe of your deeds. Oh, Lord, renew them in our day. In our time, make them known. In wrath, remember mercy. Because we cannot comprehend the awesome power of God's anger towards those who would hurt who he loves. When my son Jude was, I think he was probably 2 years old, we were at this restaurant, not like a super nice restaurant, but one, there's like waiters that come and stuff. It wasn't McDonald's. And so they did what they do with families, right? They took us and they put us in the corner booth, the one that's kind of like curved, just try to tuck us away. But it was noon and it's a pretty nice, popular restaurant. And so lots of people showed up and it filled up. And so we're just hanging out, having lunch in this little corner booth. And there's this young lady and her boyfriend and this other couple sitting right next to us. And so Jude is, he's 2. He's getting bored. Now, let me tell you something. Carrie and I have always been very, very sensitive to our kids in public. Like, it's really important to us that, like, if we're at a restaurant, we don't want them to disturb someone else's meal, right? They're there, they're paying. We're very conscientious about that. But in this moment, Jude just moved faster than I really saw coming. So we're sitting there eating, and Jude just sort of stands up. That was fine. He's not doing anything. And then just for a moment, he just sort of bounces a little bit and bangs on the back of our booth, okay? So it's kind of back here. And before I can even register what's happening, this young lady to my left, she spins around, stands up, leans all the way across past me, as far as she can to get as close to Jude as possible, and screams in his face, "You stop that." I was a little shocked. I'm registering all of this, and she's sort of kind of right here, and Jude is kind of right here, so it's pretty easy for me. I'm just boom, I'm right in between her and Jude. And at this point, I'm like, what is going on? This woman's crazy. I've never seen a response like this. And I said, "I'm sorry. What, can I help? What's going on?" And she goes, "You make that little monkey shut up." Peace of God, And at this point, I'm calculating. I'm can I punch a woman in the face? And then I'm well, her boyfriend's here. Can I just take him outside and thrash him? Would that work? I don't know. And so anyway, I finally was Pastor, and I was like, if you have a problem with my son, talk to me. Left it at that. She turned around, she sat down. We turned around, we sat down, finished our meal, super uncomfortable. Oh man, the tension was thick. We pretty much left as quickly as we could, and we went outside, put Jude, strapped him in his little seat, and I said, and he was so shocked. His eyes are big as saucers. And I said, "Hey, little buddy, listen, I want you to know this. You were never in danger. I would never have let someone hurt you. They were going to have to get through me first. And if you thought that was terrifying, man, I'm just glad I got to her before Carrie did, right? I'm telling you, is there anything more terrifying than a mom protecting her baby cubs? That's terrifying. We call Carrie the Wolverine, small and fierce. I just saved that woman's life. She didn't know how close she was to death. But can I tell you that in the midst of that confrontation, and I can say this in all sincerity, I never hated her. I was never I didn't hate this woman. What I was feeling and what was fueling my response was love for my son. I'm going to protect him. I'm going to watch out for him no matter what. Nobody's going to lay a finger on him. It is pure love. And so the reason that we get confused about God's anger is because we don't understand the intensity of his love. And we imagine that anger can only be fueled ever by hatred because that's what so many of us have experienced in our lives. And what's really tragic is that there are some people they think that God's anger is born out of hatred, and so they're looking forward to God to bring judgment on the world because God hates those people because that's how they feel about those people, and so God must hate them because I hate them. And then there's some who will say, well, God would never bring judgment, never be angry with anyone because God is love, but here's the reality, that God's anger is fueled by his love. God is love. It is the defining characteristic of who he is. It is the very essence of his being. And his anger is an expression of his love moving in defense of those he loves and cares for and protects. And so the intensity, the ferocity of his anger cannot help but reflect the intensity of his love. And see, this is why Habakkuk has such confidence in God. That God will move for his sake, that God will move to rescue him because he has confidence in the intensity of God's love. Therefore, he knows the intensity of God's anger in his defense to come to his rescue, even when he's faced with his worst fears. And this is why Habakkuk can close with this amazing statement, declaration of faith. Though the fig tree does not bud, verse 17, and there are no grapes on the vines, though the olive crop fails and the fields produce no food, though there are no sheep in the pen and no cattle in the stalls. Put that in our context. Though the stock market crumbles, though the wrong person gets elected president, though the economy crashes and the global crisis and there's a pandemic and everything else falls apart, though your worst nightmares come true, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will be joyful in God, my Savior. The sovereign Lord is my strength. He makes my feet like the feet of a deer, and he enables me to go on the heights. See, Habakkuk isn't living in some fantasy world. He's not living in denial. He's like, no, this is going to happen. No, he knows that nothing has changed in his situation. Babylon is still coming. People will die. People will starve. Families will be enslaved. Thousands and thousands of people will be exiled to live in a foreign country. He knows all of that to be true. But in an unstable world, faced with his worst fears, God is his strength, his sure footing. So that even when his world seems to be falling apart, his life seems to be falling apart, his soul can still soar. See, when you know God, when you have this confidence in his character and his power, his love, his intense love for you, then nothing can hold you down. Several years ago, a friend of mine decided that he no longer believed in God. He told me point blank that there was this tragedy that happened in his life. And he said, because this happened, God cannot exist. If God was real, this would never have happened. And see, he had this list in his mind of what God was and wasn't allowed to do in his life. And so God violated his list, and therefore he canceled God. And what he was really doing was he was creating parameters and boundaries for what God could and couldn't do, not only in his life, but what God could and couldn't do to create good, what God could use for good. See, when we tell God, you can't do that, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't allow this to happen, and you shouldn't allow this to happen to me especially, right? What we're doing is we're assuming that we can determine the limitations of what God can use to create good that is often unexpected and unseen. The good that he wants to create within us. See, we would prefer to avoid pain and suffering and tragedy, all of those things. Like nobody's signing up for those things. But what we fail to take into account is the fact that God, so often, this is how he grows our capacity, he grows our character, so that we become people who are more compassionate, more loving, more empathetic, more resilient, and more courageous, so that we can help those people in our lives who are imprisoned by fear. That we can tell them that there is hope. We can tell them that there is a God who loves them. We can tell them that there is a future that they can find in him. See, one of the ways that God so powerfully, so deeply moves within us to shape our souls and to renew our hearts, to grow us, all of that is accomplished in the crucible of trial, of the crucible of pain and suffering and difficulty that we wish we could avoid. But can I tell you that peacetime does not create warriors? It's in the battle that the warrior's heart is revealed and forged. It's in the storm that you learn to find peace in chaos. It's in despair that you can discover hope that cannot be crushed. It is when you face the reality of death itself that you can find the courage to truly live, to be fully alive. I don't know what you might be afraid of today. I don't know what's on your greatest fears list. I don't know if it's global, if it's political, if it's local, if it's personal, whatever it is that keeps you up at night, that makes you worried, makes you afraid. I don't know what it is that crowds in on your soul in the dark of night. But I can tell you that you can choose faith. You can choose a faith that is stronger than fear, because faith, at the end of the day, is not a feeling. Sometimes we get confused. We think that faith is a feeling. What we mean is that faith is a feeling of confidence, of hopefulness. But faith itself is a choice to trust God with your future. Trusting and believing that he has something better up his sleeve. Something that you may never be able to predict or ever see. Is something that you may never see even in your lifetime. It may be something that he only grows deep within you. But that if you follow him, your best days are always yet to come. And you can have confidence that that's true because he is the warrior who has already gone to war for you. That when we were trapped and imprisoned and threatened by sin and death, that God himself took up arms and he waded into battle and he stormed the very gates of hell to rescue you and me. The greatest threat, can I tell you, the greatest threat to you, it's not out there, it's within you. The greatest threat that we will ever face is the sin and the brokenness, the regret, the shame that we feel from the things that we've done, the things that we've wished we'd done and didn't, the things that we have yet to do. Right? All of that separates us and alienates us from God. And see, that emptiness that you can't seem to escape, that you feel, that existential itch that you can't seem to scratch, that is your soul without God. But 2,000 years ago, Jesus came. He became one of us in order to heal that divide. And the greatest act of love that the world has ever seen, he gave his life so that we could be free. He gave his life so that we could find forgiveness for our sins and we could have a sure hope of eternal life. And everything that your soul is searching for, hope, love, beauty, truth, goodness, all of those things are found in a relationship with him. When you know Jesus, you discover that he is the one that your soul has been searching for all along. If you don't know Jesus like that, let me tell you that it's not enough just to know about him. It's not enough to come to church and agree with everybody. You have to know him, to be in a relationship with him. And that means trusting him for your life that you can't do. You can't heal your own soul. You can't raise your heart to life. You can't raise your own self from the dead. Only he can do that. But you can choose to trust him for your future. Say, Jesus, I can't save myself. I give my life to you. To step into a relationship with him that will change your life forever. You just pray with me for a moment. Just bow your heads and close your eyes. And if you're here right now and you've never taken this step of faith, I just want to invite you right now. You know that you do not have that relationship with Jesus, that this is your moment. And you can say to him right now, Jesus, I give you my life. I trust that you died for my sins so that I could have an eternity with you. I give you my life. You can say that to him right now. You can say it out loud in your heart. Jesus, I give you my life. And if you prayed that, I want you to know that Jesus heard you and he has come into your life. He has exchanged your life with his. He's going to begin to change you. But I just want to ask you if you would please come and tell me, if you made that decision today to move from death into life, to give your life to Jesus, please come and tell me. I don't want you to walk this journey alone. Father, we just come to you right now and just pray for any who made that decision this morning. there's anyone here who gave their life to you, I pray that they would know your presence, that they would know that it is more than just a feeling that they're looking for, but is the reality of you. That they've begun a new journey that is going to change everything about them. And I pray that they would just have the courage to come and tell me. We want to walk alongside them, and so Lord, I pray that you would just give us that privilege. Father, all of us, we face our fears each and every day in different ways, but it's so easy to be consumed by them instead of being consumed by you. And so I pray that we would follow the pattern of Habakkuk and we would begin with you. That we would every day begin by simply taking you in and be reminded, Lord, of your awesome power and your beauty and your grace and your magnificent, but also your strength and your wrath. All of it fueled by your incredible love for each one of us in the world that you've made. Lord, I pray that we would be a people who are consumed by you, so that then our problems, as we glance at them, they're real. We're not pretending that they're not, but that we believe, we have confidence that even those things that we fear, Lord, that you can use them for good in us, as we then create good in the lives of others. Lord, help us to follow you. It's in your name we pray.